Today, who's really stealing your money? Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to another of our conversations with John Adams, the economist. Hello, John.
Hello, how you going?
Very good. Good to see you again.
You too.
So we're going to have an interesting conversation today about money.
Exactly.
Why that conversation?
So monetary economics is perhaps one of the most complex strands of economics that there is. And a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the housing market and with these debt bubbles in the Australian economy and around the world, a lot of it has to do with money and the nature of money and what governments and central banks have been doing with money. And one of the things I've noticed is that there's a lot of confusion among the public about what money is and what the role of money is in the economy. But also, more importantly, there's a lot of confusion and ignorance in federal parliament.
That's a surprise.
So there are a few parliamentarians who have a reasonable grasp about economics, but when it comes to monetary economics in particular, when I was serving as advisor in 2012-13, there was probably only one or two members of Parliament in its entirety, both in the House of Reps and the Senate, that had any sort of inkling about what monetary economics was all about.
And interestingly, in our first post, there were a few dialogues afterwards, discussions after the post, saying, well, why can't we just let things continue to run?
Exactly.
No? Yeah.
Exactly.
So clearly our audience is also asking some interesting questions about what is money and how does it work, and so it seems quite appropriate to spend some time thinking about what may seem quite a simple question, but I suspect you're going to tell me it's way more complicated.
I think it's relatively simple if you have a sort of reasonable understanding of what the basic principles are. But the problem is that in the education system, but also through government and the media, those basic principles are not really taught.
Okay. So you're saying it's actually an education problem, right? It's
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I've been doing a bit of a social experiment over the last few weeks, just by talking to people about a very simple question, and then I'm finding people getting quite a bit confused by the question and what it actually means. So here we have on the table, we have three coffee cups. We have one coffee cup by itself, and we have two coffee cups in another pile. Mm-hmm. So you go to any average coffee shop, say in Wollongong or in Sydney, etc., and to buy a cappuccino in terms of one of these coffees, you're going to buy one coffee with a $5 note. And you're going to buy two coffees with a $10 note. Now, in reality, what you're doing is that you've got two pieces of plastic with different color ink, and yet one piece of plastic allows you to buy two coffees, whereas another piece of plastic only allows you to buy one coffee. So the question is, why is it that one piece of plastic gets you two coffees, and another piece of plastic only gets you one coffee? What do you think, Martin?
Well, that must be because we know somehow intrinsically that when it says 10 is twice as much as 5, so therefore I should be able to get twice as much stuff. But it's the same bit of plastic.
It is the same piece of plastic. So it's interesting you talk about intrinsic value. So the government has said that this piece of plastic is worth 10, or it is worth $10 worth of stuff, whereas this was only $5 worth of stuff. So now, in this situation, there is no difference between the two pieces of plastic, and most people believe that this piece of plastic is worth more is because the government has said it is. And in economics, this is what they call fiat currency. So fiat in Latin is it shall be. So you basically have an example of where the government by decree says that one piece of plastic is worth more than another piece of plastic, and then you have the ability to buy more relative to another. Now, the first example of where you had a fiat currency system where it was based on either paper or plastic was in China in the 11th century. Right. And what happens is that when you give politicians and bureaucrats control of the money and they can just create infinite amounts of paper or plastic, ultimately people see past the illusion that you have between these pieces of plastic, because they realize that there is no intrinsic value. So historically, the reason why the $10 note would be worth more than the $5 note is because you could go to the government and trade this piece of plastic for more gold or silver. So I have some silver pieces here from the Perth Mint. So you basically would get, say, 2 pieces of silver for that piece, and you get 1 piece of silver for that piece. And when that happens, that's what you call, in this case, the silver standard. And the independent silver expert, who's an American, David Morgan, he said in more societies throughout human history, silver has been the standard of money, whereas most people think it's actually gold. But it actually is silver that people have used more of in terms of the past. So the reason why silver or gold, for example, it is able to hold its value is because in and of itself, you can use gold and silver for other things, so it has tangible value, but also because there is a limited amount of how much silver or gold is mined per year. So I think, for example, the increase in gold supply may increase by 1.75% per annum. So that actually limits. So when money is tied to gold or silver, that actually limits to how much additional money in the system you can print. But when it's not connected to gold or silver, then the government can print infinite amounts of money. And then once people realize that, see past the illusion, then they lose confidence in the money.
So that means that if I take this $10, right, and go to the Reserve Bank and say, give me something in return for it,
yes,
right, there is absolutely nothing behind it.
No.
Right? Which is an interesting thought. And that means also that there's no reason why they couldn't cross that out and put 20 and say, today, this is worth 20.
Exactly. So in the 1920s, Australia was on a gold standard.
Right.
And then the British got off the gold standard in the 1920s, and then we got off it. But then the world monetary system was on a gold standard after World War II, which was the Bretton Woods system. And then what happened in the late 1960s was that the US government was spending enormous amounts of money with the Vietnam War, and they were running out of gold to settle their debts. So this is where Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. And since 1971, we have had a fiat currency system.
Okay. So John, look, I've got these notes in my hand, and if I want to buy a property today, right, I need a pretty big wheelbarrow full of these to be able to actually buy it. I guess if I bought the same property 10 years ago, I would need a smaller wheelbarrow, because effectively back then the value of things was lower.
That's right.
But I'm really not totally clear on what really has happened, because effectively there's no reality behind this. There's no gold or anything. So the numbers just got bigger.
Yes. So the numbers got bigger because over the last decade, the government and the banking system have created more physical and digital pieces of plastic that has expanded the money supply. And then obviously with more of those in circulation, those become worth less. And obviously property prices go higher because the house, relative to an increase in pieces of plastic, the house is worth more because there's more pieces of plastic in circulation. So that's why you see house prices going up when you have an increase in the money supply. And this is going back to, I think, our first conversation when we talked about, well, what is inflation? And inflation is when you create more pieces of paper, more pieces of plastic, and it's actually the growth of money, not the increase in prices. The consequence of creating more pieces of plastic is that the plastic is worth less, people see past the illusion, and then prices go up.
So that means that savings that I have today, compared with 10 years ago, are actually worth less. The number might be bigger,
yes,
but in terms of what I can do with it, it's smaller.
Exactly. So that's what economists call the when you lose purchasing power.
Right.
So when you think about money, what is the purpose of money? It is to transact, to buy a good or service, and the value of money is what can you get for in terms of that thing. So in terms of the money. So when you think about Zimbabwe, they had $1 trillion note. There was poor people in Zimbabwe who were billionaires, but that Zimbabwean dollar it didn't actually translate for them to actually buy real goods and services that they need to actually have a good standard of living.
Right. So the definition of money is partly as a medium of exchange. Right?
Yes.
That's a fundamental part of it. But if the value effectively is being devalued simply because more of it's being created, then effectively it's all just illusory.
Precisely. And what we've seen for the last 1,000 years is that when you have a paper or plastic currency that's not backed by anything tangible, the politicians will always print too much of it. It diminishes its value. Inflation goes up. People lose confidence in that money, and then the money goes back to its intrinsic. The pieces of plastic go back to intrinsic value, which is basically zero. So, for example, in Germany, with what happened with the German mark was when you had hyperinflation running at 322% per month. Ultimately, people lost confidence in the pieces of plastic called the mark, and then they had to come up with a new currency called the Rentenmark, which was gold-backed. Or in the case of Zimbabwe, when people lost confidence in the Zimbabwean dollar, they just substituted the Zimbabwean dollar and started using US dollars. And so those examples. So obviously these examples are people saying, well, we're not going to see, or people, we've never had hyperinflation in Australia. People saying, well, those things don't happen. But this is the course of what happens when you create too many pieces of plastic. You have runaway inflation, and you have loss of value. And this is what we're seeing in housing. And obviously the consequence of that is we've got the biggest amount of debt relative to income since the first sleep.
Okay. So let's just, as we come to the close of this conversation, then come back to the question. So who is stealing our money?
Well, so who is stealing the money? It is the politicians. It is the Reserve Bank. They are creating pieces of plastic that is actually diminishing the value of the dollar, and that is then resulting in the prices of things going up. And so you think about housing. People like to talk about increase in population, immigration, or land supply, or bank, or government regulation, or material cost, electricity, etc. And obviously those elements play a role in the price of a property. But we know that the bulk of the increase in property prices is due to what they've done with money. It's because it's actually reflecting in the debt statistics, and this is why we've got the biggest debt bomb in the history of the country.
John, every time I speak to you, I end up feeling less comfortable at the end of it. But thank you nevertheless. It's been really interesting. And next time I get a note out of my wallet, I'll think twice.
No problem.
Very much.
Thank you.
So there you go. How much is your money worth? Not as much as you thought. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. And if you found this useful or interesting or educational, please consider making a contribution to our Patreon account. The details are here on the link. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. See you next time.